the history of wigs come a long way. From straw wigs that were worn by judges, to human hair wigs that look better than your own hair. In many Jewish communities, wigs are a very popular choice, but this wasn't always the case. But until today, there is still a debate that began 500 years ago whether wigs should be worn at all, or if it really fulfilled the law properly of a Jewish woman covering her hair after marriage. So how did the wig debate even begin? The hat business. It started off from the fashion trends in Europe of wearing a hat that were worn for both fashion and modest trends by both Jews and Christians that lived among each other. One Jewish lady came by to the rabbis with a request to wear a wig because she had a bald spot, and every time she'd take her hat off, her bald spot would show and she felt very uncomfortable with it. They permitted this, but in the condition that her hat would cover 90% of the wig all the time to not make it appear like her own hair was showing. Later on, as more Jewish women started to wear hats that became the ongoing trend in European fashion, it began to cause an issue of violating the Sabbath law of carrying. This was because many of them also often took their hats off to show to others, but on the Sabbath, they'd forget that carrying was forbidden while being outside and accidentally commit the sin of carrying. At the same time, the hat didn't always completely cover all of the head, although some wore both a hat and a scarf together as advised by the Rambam, but not everyone followed this. Some did want to participate in the fashion trends by showing some hair with the hat, but at the same time did not want to do such a sin, so the suggested idea came to put a wig to avoid both carrying on the Sabbath and avoid showing their own hair. The wigs at the time did not involve benefiting from idolatry or appearing immodest, but it conflicted with the appearance of covering the hair properly, so the rabbis that did permit wigs gave one important condition, which was for the hat to cover 90% of the wig, as going out with just a wig at the time looked as if the woman wasn't covering her hair at all, and many of them saw it as fooling God. In general, many of the rabbis were against the idea of wigs even if they didn't look attractive at all, or actually even worse than the woman's own hair. In fact, wigs of those days looked more like a mop, which was very unappealing. But it wasn't the right look for a Jewish woman as the daughter of the king. The 1900s came along, and it was the end of the fashion era for hats and beginning of short hair completely uncovered. This was also the beginning steps of the world letting go of modesty, especially for the Western countries, and naturally the Jews of Europe have followed along with the fashion trends. Eventually, short wigs came into fashion too for the Orthodox Jewish communities of Europe, although it had been accepted by some rabbis that short wigs were modest. Those who disagreed didn't voice their opinion as much about this matter. On the contrary, the Jews of the Middle East and elsewhere were completely against this agenda of wigs because they saw it as looking like the other nations and not like a Jewish nation. Until today, many have claimed that wearing a wig is an imitation of looking like a non-Jewish model from Hollywood, a place of complete promiscuity, and is not encouraged to aim to such looks. Long wigs did not come into existence, yet short wigs were still not a popular choice by many. But these are very big rabbis from Europe who were in favor of a headscarf over a wig. In the Jewish year of 5718, being 1958 by the Gregorian calendar, was a hard period for Russians, including the Jews there. During these years, the country was in a difficult position economically, making it very challenging for simple survival. It then came to the attention of the Lubavitcher rabbi, whom was sent a letter by a Jew from Russia asking him why this was happening and how they could prevent this situation. The rabbi responded back and has written in the letter that anytime there is an economic crisis anywhere in the world where Jews live is because of immodesty, directing this message to the Orthodox Jews, writing to check the wigs immediately and be careful of it. To many, if not all, the rabbi is known to be an advocate for wigs, if not the biggest one. Although his mother and wife did preferably wear scarves and hats, the debate still went on, and many big sages at the time was still against the idea of wigs, but some were acceptive of short wigs being modest. Others still believed that if someone was to wear a wig, it should still be covered mostly with a hat. Our sages have always mentioned how times would get harder the closer we get to the day of redemption. They also knew that modesty gave power to the economy, and that the days before the redemption, the immodesty will increase whilst the economy will decline. And in the modern-day era we live in, it is acceptable among many communities to wear long wigs, despite the fact the use of hair coming from idolatry has increased, and that has also led to immodesty in the communities. Our sages have gone back and forth if wigs were modest or not, but today it is reclaimed that the head cover has nothing to do with modesty, which is not true. Today we are in a situation where we follow the local rabbis instead of our big sages. The majority of the sages were always against wigs because it was immodest, even if it was short. Our bigger sages of today are against it because of the use of idolatry, but instead, many are relying on the kosher stamps and the words of local rabbis, while taking a huge risk and ignoring the words of our big rabbis of the generation today. Just before World War I, the Enlightenment movement started off as modern Orthodox and accumulated to reform. By the time it got to World War II, the Jewish nation started to integrate with the non-Jewish society, from going to theaters to speaking a non-Jewish language, drifting away from the Torah, God forbid. And the wigs of today give the impression of a non-Jewish look, and many modern Orthodox Jews are following the lifestyle of the non-Jewish nations right now, and this is what our sages feared from the wigs to lead to immodesty.